Great. I'm happy to be here today to share a little bit about Arsenal Medical with you. I'm Dr. Upma Sharma, a Princeton-trained chemical engineer, and I'm passionate about developing products at the intersection of materials and medicine. Arsenal, at our heart, is a biomaterials company where we have 3 clinical stage products. We've created 3 clinical stage products. We spun out one in chronic rhinosinusitis into Lyra Therapeutics, which subsequently IPO'd. And we have 2 clinical stage products, which I'll be touching upon a little bit later in this presentation. But I originally joined the company as a research scientist because I was really drawn to the vision of the founders of the company. Our founders have created companies like Moderna and Genzyme, transformed and created over $100 billion in various industries, all through the power of chemistry and material science. And they really asked the question, how can we create materials to be better used through all these different areas? And so it was a big vision. It wasn't sort of a single product, a single therapeutic area, but rather, can we create a whole new class of products using materials where the device actually becomes the material? And here I'm showing our 2 clinical stage products within Arsenal, our Rescue Foam product and NeoCast. Rescue Foam is a product in the trauma space, and the way to think about it is like a human fix-a-flat. So if your tire goes flat, use fix-a-flat to get you to the gas station. If instead of your tire, it's your liver, and you're not going to make it to a surgeon alive, Rescue Foam can be administered and give you enough time to get to the surgeon alive. That product has been supported with a lot of non-dilutive funding. The rest of my presentation, I'm going to focus on NeoCast, which is a neurovascular liquid embolic device. But I think the other thing that's important to note here is how different these products look. And that's because we're trying to treat very different clinical and conditions. And so the materials ultimately need to have very different solutions. So let's talk a little bit more about embolization. Embolization simply is a procedure to occlude blood flow somewhere where you don't want blood to go, the classic example being a tumor. Embolization is a very large market. Market research puts this at a $4 billion market and growing rapidly to get to $6 billion by 2032. But we actually think these numbers underestimate the embolization market because there's a variety of emerging indications as physicians seek ways to move away from invasive surgical procedures to minimally invasive procedures. There's a number of indications shown here that aren't included in these latest market numbers. So I want to talk about some of the patients we've treated clinically. Raymond, a patient who has extreme hand numbness and was unable to write. Gail, who had gait issues and had challenges walking. And Cliff, who had severe and debilitating headaches. And all of these patients have what's known as chronic subdural hematoma, or CSDH. And I'll talk a little bit more about that condition. But I think one thing that's interesting to note is that data that came out last summer shows that this will become the most common neurovascular procedure, even surpassing stroke. So this is a huge condition that you're going to be hearing a lot more about if you haven't already. So what is CSDH? CSDH is ultimately like a bruise on the surface of your brain. A patient, typically an elderly patient, has some sort of trauma. This could be as little as hitting your head on the car door. And that causes a bleed. If the patient is anticoagulated, what would be acute bleed can become a persistent and chronic bleed and start to lead to symptoms. Those symptoms can start with something like a headache, but become over time something that looks like dementia that's ultimately reversible. CSDH is the leading cause of reversible dementia. Historically, the way this has been treated is surgically. So you basically drill a hole in the patient's skull and evacuate the bruise. But you haven't treated the underlying condition, which is these leaky capillaries that continue to bleed and feed the bruise. And so you have a pretty high recurrence rate. And so the physician started looking for ways to actually treat the condition from the bleed. And that's where they started exploring the use of legacy liquid embolics. So these liquid embolics, as you can see on the screen, have been on the market for almost 2 decades. And there's 2 classes, one that contains a toxic solvent, and the second that is basically using the same material that you find in superglue. So when you think about going back to the premise of the company, how would you design the ideal material for putting in an elderly patient's brain? I don't think you think about, let me start with the toxic solvent. But I think there's such a high need here for this condition that physicians, and you can see the multinational strategics, have invested tens of millions of dollars in doing these large randomized controlled studies across the globe to investigate the liquid as a way to treat the underlying disease here. And data that came out in New England Journal last fall showed that the data is very promising. Embolization, first importantly, was very safe, but also had significant benefits over the traditional therapies like surgery. But they also pointed out opportunities for the next generation. In these publications, 80 to 96% of the patients underwent general anesthesia for a minimally invasive procedure to manage the pain associated with the agents themselves. And again, the purpose of these procedures is to get to the distal area. Their own data showed that they were only able to do that 50% of the time. So we've created a next-generation solvent-free, non-adhesive material that we use shear thinning science to be able to get to the deepest, most distal parts of the vasculature first, and then fill from that position backwards. And here you can see some data showing that we're superior to benchmarks in animal studies. The market leader shown on the top row and our product shown in the bottom row. And you can see that we are able to penetrate much more deeply and much more consistently. In fact, we've quantified this and shown we can get 5 times deeper than the current on the market products. We've also showed that there's less of an art to our injection. So we hear the physicians saying there's a lot of art to being able to get deep with the current products. And in reality, we try to use the shear thinning science to take that art out. And here you can see our data shows that novice users are able to get much deeper than KOLs are with the commercial products. We've explored this. We've translated these preclinical results into 2 clinical indications, both taking advantage of the same vessel, the middle meningeal artery. And we started in tumors because it's a preoperative indication. So from a regulatory perspective, it was easier to start there while we were collecting longer-term data. We studied this in 5 patients in 5 tumors, and you can see these tumors are quite large. And we wanted to look at both the initial safety and the feasibility of the injections. And here you can show we were able to get, in all 5 patients, excellent penetration into the tumors and saw a very good translation of our preclinical results to human subjects. And the goal here in a tumor is to, the reason to do a preoperative embolization is to make the procedure, the actual operation, much less bloody and a shorter procedure. So it was only 5 patients, but as we compared it to the literature, 800 patients across a number of publications, you can see that we're the green dot, so we're kind of the outlier in that we're a faster surgery and a less bloody surgery. So again, the product is doing what we intended it to do. We've also now just announced completion of enrollment of a second first-in-human in chronic subdural hematoma itself. We were able to enroll that very rapidly, demonstrated our primary safety endpoint, successful occlusion of the vessels, and overall the physicians were very excited, and we're not happy to actually go back to the commercial products, which is, I think, is what you're always looking for after a first-in-human. All of this is possible because of the amazing team, including our chairman, who was CEO of Kaifon and chairman of Relievant Medical. So that's just a little bit about Arsenal today. If you're excited or interested in joining us on the journey, I'd love to chat more. Thank you.